Our regular Monday panel of political strategists. With me here in the studio, Grahame Morris from Barton Deakin, and joining us from the Sky News Centre, Bruce Hawker from Campaigns and Communications. Gentlemen, thanks for joining us once again. I want to start with these budget figures that we saw, without going through once again the ins and outs of last year's budget data, which we can now see. What does it mean, Grahame, do you think, for this current year that we're in and the government's hopes of getting a surplus?
Well, I would have thought that the Treasurer's actually got to have some sort of a mini budget in October or November, or his May budget's going to look really sick. There's no doubt the next two budgets the Treasurer brings in, or the one in May and maybe a mini budget, the figures are going to have to be so cooked or roasted or fried or barbecued. Otherwise, it's not going to add up.
Or he makes big spending cuts.
Or big spending cuts, or somehow or other he thinks that confidence in him and the Prime Minister going to come zooming over the hill, and everyone's going to go out there and spend and be really happy, and we're going to have huge income boosts. Now, that's not going to happen.
Now, Bruce, before we get to how we might be able to pull this off, how politically important is this surplus now for the Gillard government?
I think it is important. They've been making a fair bit of noise about it for quite a while, and that was in response, I guess, to attacks from the opposition and others about it. I've never been obsessed with the idea of balancing the budget at any cost, but I think they are locked into getting a balanced budget, so they are going to have to find savings if commodity prices continue to drop away.
So let's have a look at what they can and can't do. Bruce, politically speaking, are there no-go areas now, particularly public servant jobs, given the way Labor's attacked the cuts in Queensland and New South Wales?
I think that should be the absolute last area Labor goes to, and I think Penny Wong in the interview she just had with you suggested the same for the obvious reason. In Queensland, New South Wales, Victoria particularly, we're seeing significant big cuts actually, and it's having an effect on the popularity of those governments. People worry about that. They don't expect Labor governments to cut public sector jobs in the way in which they accepted of Tory governments. They expect services to continue to be provided. So I think that is a real no-go area for Labor. I think it would undermine their strategy of tying Abbott into the cuts that have been announced by Campbell Newman and Barry O'Farrell and Ted Baillieu.
So what do they do? I mean, none of this is easy for a government politically, but what do they do? Put more means tests, take away benefits for the wealthy, that sort of thing again?
Well, you can always look at those areas, and there has been something of an explosion of that in the last 15 years or so. I don't know that there's a heck of a lot of areas yet to be worked on there, to be frank with you. I think in the last budget they really took a knife to a lot of those areas, and this is an election year, so there's a lot of people in the middle class that they're going to be trying to woo. I think they'll be looking for efficiencies in areas like the way in which they roll out information technology services, transport, travel, those sorts of things, and trying to keep a real tight rein on all those sorts of things. And I'm sure that they are actually doing that now, because they have really nailed their colours to the mast when it comes to balancing the budget.
Yeah, one of the few remaining areas of government assistance that's not means tested is the childcare rebate, but of course that's often described by both sides as something that's an incentive to work, so they perhaps don't want to take that away from any middle or high income earners. Grahame, what do you reckon? What's politically a no-go area for this government, do you think?
Well, if you were the Treasurer, what would you do? He hasn't really cut much. The public service itself has been asked to have efficiency dividends, and it has cut itself, but the government has not cut programs itself. You get to the stage in Treasury, finance and health and whatnot, if you cut any more public servants, then somebody like Penny Wong has got to say, hey, Treasury won't do this anymore, or Finance won't do that. But in some areas there, they really do have to look at programs. And you think, well, there are a number of things they shouldn't have done. They shouldn't have mucked around with the boat people policy and all that have now cost them a blinking fortune. But there are a couple of things that really irk me. I can't find a fair income figure in the budget for the NBN. And you think this is a squillion-dollar program, and somehow or other
it's off budget.
Somehow or other the Tooth Fairy and the Easter Bunny are going to pay for. In fact, come to think of it, if I were the Treasurer and I was Senator Wong, I'd sort of turn up at the budget. She is the Tooth Fairy, the Treasurer as the Easter Bunny, and probably, and then they say, look, this is all too hard. We're going to pay past the parcel and give all the debt to the next government or to the next generation. That'd be much more credible than what they're about to do.
All right, so you reckon there should be some programs that they actually cut this time around?
Well, I think they're going to have to. They are not going to get the only thing that's going to change confidence in this country, where people spend, they go back into the shops, they employ people, small business keeps going and everything else, that is a change of government. The Treasurer can't deliver that, so he's going to have to cut programs. But remember that is just this one. The next budget, we've got to pay for education boost, we've got to pay for disability things, we've got to pay for dentists. That is in the next budget. Goodness knows how the Tooth Fairy is going to pay for those.
Well, it's not going to be easy. I'm sure we'll be talking to both of you on when we do get to the budget update, even the mini budget at the end of this year at some point in the next few months. I just want to move on. Julia Gillard this week in New York, attending the UN General Assembly. Of course, the main item on the plate for the Prime Minister and others there is trying to get us a seat on the UN Security Council. This is a push that Kevin Rudd began back in 2008. It's looking pretty tough. We might win it, we might not. We're up against Finland and Luxembourg. We're struggling to get the votes of the Europeans. The Africans are in the mix, but apparently we're doing pretty well amongst Middle Eastern, Asian, Pacific and Caribbean countries as well. Now, Tony Abbott this morning was critical of all the money and effort that's being put into this. And drew a link between what the Prime Minister's doing in New York at the UN and where she should be this week. Have a look.
Rather than talking to African countries, try to drum up the numbers to get us a temporary seat on the UN Security Council. She should be in Jakarta talking to President Yudhoyono about how we can cooperate better with the Indonesians.
Only problem is President Yudhoyono isn't in Jakarta this week. Where is he? You guessed it, he's in New York.
If Mr Abbott had bothered to check his facts, he'd know that the President is actually in New York at the moment. That is a clear matter of public record. This is yet another example of reckless negativity.
Now, Graham, fair enough. Tony Abbott may not know exactly where Yudhoyono is on any day of the week, but is he really saying the PM shouldn't go to the UN General Assembly in New York?
No, but that seems to me an example of the stupid sort of gotcha journalism we've got nowadays. But ignoring that, and ignoring what you said, look, I didn't think this was a bad idea when it was first floated. It wasn't a great idea, but it wasn't a bad one. It'd be terrific if we won it. But it seems to me you go flat out at these sort of things, that we sort of, the Prime Minister has to hit 7 sixes, she's got to kick 15 goals, and she's got to score 14 tries, and we've got 2 minutes to go in the game. And she turns up. And you think, oh, blimey, if you're fair income, do it properly. Run a proper campaign. And this one has cost us $40 million, and it's just blurbled out, and it hasn't been effective. And you think, oh, look, for our own country, I hope to hell that we win this. The prestige is good. But I think we're going to come second or third.
Are you saying that too much effort's gone into this or not enough?
No, I'm saying if you're going to do it, you do it properly instead of this dribble that we've had. Quite expensive dribble. And it's just dribbled out, but it hasn't been a concerted campaign. You know, it has been left to sort of amateurs and it's gone nowhere. Kevin Rudd would have driven this properly.
Look, I'm sure Kevin Rudd would have put a lot of effort into this. Bruce Hawker, what do you think, though? Is it going to matter much either way?
Oh, look, I don't think it's going to make any real difference to the outcome of the next election, if that's what you mean, but I think it's much more important in other ways. And by the way, Alexander Downer, Graham's old boss, was the biggest supporter of going down this route in the Howard government and was talked out of it by Howard and others. And he continues to support this proposition in op-ed pieces co-written with Kevin Rudd. But it is important, I think, because the Security Council is the only body in the world which is mandated with the authority to forcefully intervene in other countries. And Australia
But are we really going to differ from the United States if we do have a seat around the table? Are we going to how much of an Australian voice would there be there, do you think?
Well, I think we've demonstrated in the past that we are capable of having an independent voice on foreign affairs matters. I think we're very well located, being in the Asian Pacific region, an area which has got some very hot issues at the moment, to put a different perspective on things. And as I remind you, it was a Security Council and UN initiative that has us in Afghanistan right now. It has us in East Timor. These are places where Australian soldiers are serving right now, and I don't think it's credible to say that we shouldn't be seeking a role there, particularly since we've got such a proud history of involvement in the United Nations going back to its very inception. And the first president, of course, of the General Assembly was Doc Evatt. And so I don't think we should be pulling away from our commitment to having a serious involvement and a serious go at this, which started in 2008 when Kevin Rudd really put his shoulder to the wheel after the Howard government refused to get involved.
All right. Just a final one quickly, because we're nearly out of time. Wayne Swan defended his criticism today that he made on Friday about so-called cranks and crazies in the Republican Party. Grahame, what do you think this is all about? We've seen a more combative Wayne Swan this year attacking mining billionaires, now sections of the Republican Party in the United States. Why is he doing this?
Because he wants to shift the focus off the crazies and the maddies behind him. Look, there are a few people in the Republican Party in the US that you wouldn't feed, but really I think the Treasurer has more problems at home rather than worrying about the poor old Republican Party. I think they've got enough problems, incidentally, without Wayne Swan's endorsement.
Perhaps, Bruce, is this about trying to, look at the range of attacks Wayne Swan's made this year? Is this about trying to play to the Labor base, the Labor heartland?
I think he was making a serious point on the international and national stage, and that is that if the Tea Party faction inside the Republican Party get up and the Republicans get across the line, then we're going to see a major contraction in the American economy, which is going to adversely affect us. And by the way, if you want to talk about people getting involved in foreign affairs, go back to what John Howard said about President Obama when he announced his candidacy in 2007 for the presidency. He said that he was the best thing Al-Qaeda had going for it. I mean, that was a moment of great embarrassment. And it was a moment of great embarrassment.
We did point that out on Friday. It was something that others in the party, I'm sure, weren't terribly comfortable with. We will have to wrap things up there. Bruce Hawker, Grahame Morris, good to talk to you both. We will be